We all have things we do that we know we shouldn't do. Maybe you're somebody who knows you should stop after two cookies, but you find it almost impossible to do that. You know intellectually that it's affecting your weight or your blood sugar or it's making you feel guilty, but you can't seem to stop yourself. And then afterwards, when you finish the bag, you beat yourself up. You feel frustrated that you didn't have enough willpower or self discipline to stop when you should have. Or maybe you're somebody who needs to go to bed earlier. You know that you're going to be exhausted the next day if you stay up too late. You're not going to be thinking clearly. You're going to be foggy headed. You're not going to have the energy for the things you want to do. And yet, when it comes bedtime, you're justifying staying up late. You're talking yourself out of going to bed, even though you know you're going to regret it the next morning. Or maybe you have a bunch of housework or homework or paperwork that needs to get done, but you keep telling yourself, I'll do it tomorrow. You make excuses. It might even be urgent. Maybe there are deadlines looming, but still you find more interesting things to do. And then maybe you spend too much time on your phone. You scroll and say to yourself, just one more video, one more reel, one more minute, one more game. But that 1 minute just stretches into hours. Now, why do we do this? Especially when we know we want better for ourselves, especially when we know this behavior is to our own detriment. Why do we do that? A lot of people think it's a lack of self control or self discipline or willpower. They think that they need to try harder or put it on a list or force themselves to do it. But those behaviors rarely work. And then we end up feeling even more helpless and hopeless. Well, I have a different perspective. What if I told you that behavior always makes sense when you understand the context in which it was formed? What if I told you that 99.9% of the time, no matter how dysfunctional a behavior looks on the outside, it's actually your subconscious trying to help you out? I have been a clinical hypnotherapist for over 25 years, and I have worked with thousands of clients, and I've seen all kinds of different behavior. I'm going to share a little bit with you in a moment. People come into me frustrated by their behavior. Maybe they've been working on it for decades. They know they should be doing something different. Sometimes they're baffled and confused by their behavior. They're successful in other areas of their life, but they just can't seem to get this thing together. And over time, I've noticed that there are basically four ways that your subconscious learns and chooses behavior. And I want to share those with you. And while I'm doing this, think about a behavior that you engage in, that you're frustrated by, that you know better and yet can't seem to change. And let's see if any of these apply to you. Now, what I'm going to do first is share with you some real case studies, people who have come to see me, just little snippets of what they shared. And later on, after I've talked about what those four ways the subconscious have learned are, we'll look at these case studies again to see how they show up with real people. So, I had a client recently who stayed with her abusive boyfriend. He hit her, he repeatedly cheated on her. She was somebody who, prior to this relationship, said, if anybody ever cheated on me, if anybody ever mistreated me, I would kick them to the curb. I would be out of there. And yet, when it actually happened to her, she justified his behavior. She made excuses for it. She just couldn't end the relationship. She felt stuck and unable to make a change. I had another client who developed a phobia level fear of kittens. Her friends thought it was hilarious. They would send her kitten videos and kitten memes and kitten pictures. They thought it was funny. People would often say to her, why do you have a fear of kittens? Kittens are adorable. But to her, it was no laughing matter. She was terrified of kittens and had no explanation for her behavior. Another client of mine became terrified every time somebody opened a car door for her. She could drive on her own, she could drive herself, but if somebody else wanted to drive her somewhere, panic, pure panic. Another client experienced panic every time she would notice herself thinking. Imagine living like that. You're carrying on your day, suddenly you realize you've had a thought, and now you're going into full blown panic mode. That was her life, day in and day out. Another man was facing losing his career and possibly having worse repercussions because of a sexual behavior that he didn't feel he could control and that he couldn't explain. Now, when I describe these situations to you, what happens inside your mind? Do you judge these people? It's okay, we all do it from time to time. Do you think that's weird? Why would somebody do that? Or what a silly thing for somebody to do? That's crazy. Now, these cases may sound strange on the outside, but again, when we look at what's going on a subconscious level, they all will make perfect sense. So, why do we need to look at the subconscious? Well, 90 to 95% of our behavior, that's a lot, is driven by the subconscious mind. And all of the things we don't choose consciously are the subconscious choosing that behavior for some reason. When you know you should be going to bed or not eating the cookies or getting off your phone or doing the thing you procrastinate on, and yet you still engage in that behavior, that's not your logical mind choosing that behavior. That's your subconscious choosing that behavior. And there's a reason why your subconscious chooses it. So we need to look at how the subconscious works. So here are the four ways your subconscious chooses behavior, the four ways your subconscious learns. The first is through modeling. So people demonstrate behavior to us and we observe it and sometimes adopt it as our own, particularly when we're kids and particularly around the people who we learn from, the authorities in our lives, our parents. We're learning how to be in the world by observing the big people around us. They don't even have to say anything. We're just soaking it all up like little sponges. So we're learning what a man's role is, what a woman's role is, what communication looks like, what conflict looks like, what relationship looks like, what sexuality looks like. And we're just absorbing it all into our subconscious. And then we recreate those behaviors in our own relationships, in our own circumstances. So maybe your mom apologized for everything, or maybe your dad never talked about emotions, or maybe conflict looked like people screaming and yelling at each other and doors slamming, or maybe nobody ever asked for help. It was considered a weakness to ask for help. You might have quietly absorbed these messages, this what was modeled for you, and then adopted it as your own behavior later. So that's one way the subconscious chooses behavior. Another is through messaging. So, by messaging, I mean the things people actually say to you directly or indirectly. Now, our parents are our first teachers. They are the first people who tell us that grass is green, cats have kittens, cows go moo. We don't even think to question the things they tell us. Now, as a bit of an aside, when we come into the world, we don't have our logical mind. We only have our subconscious. This is Mother Nature's way of making sure we can learn all the things we need to learn in those first few years of our lives. We got a lot to learn. And so we're just, again, taking it all in, soaking it up, particularly if it's something that is said to us by a person we put in a position of authority, and our parents are authorities. So, what kind of messages were you exposed to? Maybe you heard things like, you'll never amount to anything, or money doesn't grow on trees, or nice girls don't get angry, or boys don't cry, or you have to earn love, or you need to put other people first. That's the polite and nice thing to do. Whatever messages you have received from other people get imprinted into your subconscious, and the subconscious does whatever it is programmed to do. The subconscious is not logical. It doesn't look at those things we're told and go, well, I don't want to do that. That's a silly thing to do. It just takes in what we're told and runs that program. Now, the next way the subconscious learns is it forms associations. So your subconscious is your protective mind. Its number one function is keep you safe. It is not the logical part of your mind. Great combination. So, how does the non logical part of your mind keep you safe? Well, it forms associations. It very quickly decides whether something is good or bad, depending on your experience of it or what you've been taught or told. So think about somebody who gets sick after eating shrimp, right? Maybe it wasn't even the shrimp that made you sick. Maybe you had a flu and you just happened to eat shrimp at that time, but your subconscious links those things together. So now shrimp has a negative association. And if you even smell shrimp or see shrimp, you just want to throw up. You feel nauseated. Or let's say the first time that you get up to do a presentation in preschool or elementary school, some kid at the back of the room snickers at you, and your subconscious goes, nope, public speaking is not safe. And now you're an adult. And even though you know public speaking might get you a raise or some other perk at work, your subconscious is still trying to keep you from doing it because you have a negative association. So the subconscious forms associations. If you get a negative association with something, don't do it anymore, even if it's not necessarily a bad thing. The subconscious can also form positive associations. If you get praised for something, if you get rewarded for something, if something gets a positive association, your subconscious says, let's do more of that. It can even be something as simple as every time you cried when you were a kid, your mother put a bottle in your mouth and soothed you by, giving you something to eat. So now whenever you feel down, whenever you feel depressed, whenever you feel bad, your subconscious goes, oh, I know it's going to help out. Let's go have something to eat. It associates eating with soothing and comfort. And so, again, if something gets a positive association, do more of it, even if it's not necessarily positive. Now, the fourth way that the subconscious chooses behavior is through protection. Again, the job of your subconscious is to keep you safe. And so it sometimes will adopt a strategy for keeping you safe that seems to make sense. So, a common example of this would be anxiety. Anxiety is your subconscious deciding that there's some kind of threat in your environment and giving you that hypervigilance so you can protect yourself from the threat. You'll have the energy to either fight or to flee, whichever is required. But again, remember the subconscious is illogical, so there may or may not actually be a threat in your environment. I was walking down the street one night on a windy day, and suddenly something jumped at me, and I screamed and threw my bag, only to realize it was a plastic bag blowing on the wind. I did not need that response, but my subconscious assumed there was a threat and immediately put me into an anxious, hypervigilant fight flight state. Perfectionism is another coping mechanism. Let's say that you had a critical parent or a critical sibling growing up. On a subconscious level, because your subconscious wants to keep you safe, it might think, well, if I'm perfect, nobody can criticize me. So you strive for perfection. You strive to be the most perfect version of yourself. But the other person's still critical of you because it was never really about you. And so people get stuck in this endless loop of trying to be a better version of themselves, trying to be more perfect. Because again, the subconscious thinks that if you're perfect, people can't find fault with you. Another example of this would be people pleasing. Okay. If you have somebody growing up who's cold, who's distant, who doesn't pay a lot of attention to you, and these are the big people who are responsible for keeping you alive, you might feel on a subconscious level like you have to make them happy so that they'll take better care of you. They'll give you the love and care that you desire. So we observe, we figure out what they value, we figure out what they praise, we figure out what they punish or criticize, and we try to be more of the things they want us to be and fewer of the things they don't want us to be. Avoidance, humor, defensiveness, all of these are coping mechanisms to keep ourselves safe. And these things can be happening simultaneously. You can have several things going on at the same time. It's not necessarily just messaging or modeling or an association or protection. It can be a lovely combination of all of them. So let's go back to the case studies. Now that you understand how the subconscious chooses behavior, I want you to play detective with me. See if you can determine whether it's messaging, modeling, the subconscious working by association, or the subconscious being protective that's at play here. So let's talk about the client who stayed with the man who repeatedly hit her and cheated on her, despite the fact that she said she would never let that happen to her. When we looked at it in hypnosis, what had happened was her mom was abusive towards her dad growing up. Mom cheated on dad. Mom was violent with dad. Mom was verbally as well as physically abusive. And the dad stayed with her right up until his death. The kids asked him, begged him, pleaded with him to leave her. But he was somebody who really believed in his vows. He really believed that you stay with somebody until the end, and that's exactly what he did. So, although my client knew intellectually that she didn't deserve this behavior, her father had modeled for her. Did you catch it? This is modeling. Her father had modeled for her staying with somebody despite their bad behavior, staying with somebody even though intellectually you know it's not healthy for you. So modeling is somebody demonstrating behavior and then you pick it up as your own. Now let's talk about the client who was terrified every time somebody opened a car door for her. What had happened with her, what we discovered in hypnosis, was her mother had told her when she was a kid that if somebody wanted to get her into a car, she should never go with them, even if that person has a gun. Run, go as fast as you can in the other direction, because what could happen in that car is even worse than getting shot. My client had no context for this as a kid. Again, she's getting this message from somebody she puts in a position of authority. Don't get into a car with somebody because it could be worse than getting shot. And so her subconscious was like, nope, not getting into that car. She could drive herself, but she couldn't take a taxi, couldn't get in an Uber, couldn't drive with somebody else because her subconscious was still trying to protect her due to the messaging she had received from her mom. Now, the backstory here, when the mom was younger, the mother's sister was abducted by somebody, was kidnapped by, guess what, somebody in a car, and they never found her afterwards. So the mother was just trying to protect her daughter by letting her know she should never get into a car with a stranger. But again, the subconscious doesn't know the difference between one situation and another. So, what is this an example of? This is an example of messaging. She got a message from a person in a position of authority that she should never get in a car with somebody. And it was also the subconscious forming a negative association with a vehicle and trying to protect her. If vehicles equal danger, something terrible is going to happen, worse than getting shot, then I shouldn't get into a vehicle with somebody else. So let's now talk about the client who came with the uncontrollable and hard to understand sexual behavior. He had been sent to me by his work because he had an upskirt fetish and he had been caught with pictures of people he worked with on his phone. And they told him that if he didn't get this under control, do some therapy, and come back with evidence that it had been resolved, he was going to be fired. Now, he didn't really want to resolve this. It was something that turned him on. It was his kink, but he also didn't want to get fired. So he came to me wanting to understand his own behavior because he couldn't figure it out. It actually was kind of sweet and innocent the way it was formed. Again, see if you can pick up on what was going on a subconscious level. When he was a kid, his mom used to have Mary Kay parties. She'd bring all of these women over. They would cuddle him and hug him and tell him how cute he was. And then his mother would put him under the table with a bunch of toys to play with. And the women would sit at the table and they would do their makeup and drink coffee and eat pastries. And it was a lovely afternoon. Now, what had happened was my client built a positive association between that love and comfort and being told he was cute and being loved on by all these women and the view that he happened to have under the table. His subconscious linked those together. It was a positive association between that feeling and that view. So later on in life, when he wanted to feel loved or comforted or like he was special, he would be drawn to look for that kind of material. Again, from the outside, it doesn't seem to make sense, but when you understand how the subconscious works, it actually developed very innocently and very sweetly. Now, let's talk about the client who would feel panicky every time she realized she was thinking. So, this client had an abusive home life. And so she didn't do very well in school. She couldn't focus, couldn't concentrate. And so she was put into the special class. And she would spend all of that time in the class looking at the clock and looking at the clock, dreading school being done and having to go back home to her abusive house. Now, she was in this constant anxious state, dreading going back home, being fearful of what was going to happen, and staring at the clock and staring at the clock. Well, above the clock was a sign that said think in capital letters with a great big exclamation mark. The subconscious is not logical. If you're anxious and you're constantly looking at the clock or looking at what's above the clock, the subconscious might assume it's that is creating the anxiety. So every time now she caught herself thinking, it would bring on a state of anxiety. This is how phobias are formed, by the way. You just have to be in some kind of anxious state for any reason, and your subconscious, in its charming, illogical way, can associate that feeling with whatever happens to be present. So her subconscious assumed it was the think sign that was making her feel anxious, not the fact that she had an abusive household. And so every time she caught herself thinking later on in life, anxiety would come on. Now let's talk about the poor woman who was afraid of kittens. Again, her friends thought it was hilarious. They sent her videos of kittens. They sent her pictures of kittens. They would constantly say to her, how can you be afraid of kittens? Nobody's afraid of kittens. Kittens are adorable. And my client was really frustrated because she could see that other people didn't have this response, but she did. And so she wanted to explore it in hypnosis. And this story is actually pretty sad. When she was a kid, she had a stray cat follow to her home, and that cat happened to be pregnant. Her father didn't want any more cats. And so when the babies were born, he flushed them down the toilet. So sad. My client at that age couldn't wrap her head around why her father would do this. So she had to believe that there was something dangerous about those kittens. Otherwise, why would her father flush them down the toilet? To consider that there must be something wrong with dad was too threatening a thought for her. So she had to assume there was something wrong with the kittens. So here's an example of a negative association, the subconscious wanting to protect you, both from what kind of monster dad might be, but also from those must be dangerous cats. So, as I've gone through these examples, has your perspective of these people changed? Did you go from what a weird thing or what an odd behavior or feeling a sense of judgment towards them to going, that actually makes some sense? So, when we understand how the subconscious works, it helps us to understand how behavior works. It helps us to understand why the subconscious is doing what it's doing. So earlier, I asked you to think of a behavior of your own, something you're baffled by, something you wish you were doing differently, but that you've had a hard time changing. And I want you to think about which one of these or which combination of these might be going on for you. Was that behavior modeled to you by somebody else? Did you get a message that made that behavior make sense? Is this behavior your subconscious operating by association, either doing something it has a positive association with or avoiding something it has a negative association with? Or is this a protective function? Is this your subconscious thinking that it's helping you out? I'm going to give you some questions that you can ask yourself to see if you can determine what might be going on for you. So let's look first at modeling. Again, modeling is when somebody demonstrates a behavior to you. Usually it's a person in position of authority. Usually it's when we're children. We're looking up to these big people and figuring out how they do things and then often adopting that behavior as our own. So when it comes to your own behavior, you can ask yourself, have I seen somebody, particularly somebody I put in a position of authority, engaging in a similar behavior? Has a similar behavior been praised or valued by the people I grew up around? Who showed me this? Who did this in my family? Who handled things in this way? If you're able to answer those questions, you may see that in fact the behavior was modeled for you. When it comes to messaging, you could ask yourself, what would I have heard about this type of behavior by people in authority? What did I hear growing up? What did I repeatedly hear about people like me? Or what wasn't said directly, but I somehow learned anyway through the people that I grew up around? When it comes to association, you want to look at whether you might have a negative or a positive association with the type of behavior you're engaging in. So if you're drawn towards something you know is unhealthy for you, you might have a positive association with it. Sugar addiction. Sugar is sometimes associated with comfort. So when we want comfort, we eat sugar. And because the subconscious isn't logical, it thinks if a little bit is good, even more is better. So you can ask yourself, what benefits do I derive from this? How does my subconscious think it's helping me? What positive messaging or feelings might have been associated with this type of behavior? If you don't do something that you know is healthy for you, you might have a negative association with that thing. For example, sleep. You know sleep is good for you, but you put off doing it. I had a client who would stay up all night listening to her parents fight downstairs when she was sleeping. She had a negative association with sleep because fighting always happened when she was sleeping. It was kind of scary for her, and she wanted to stay awake and listen to what was going on to make sure everything was okay. So, if you have a negative association, you might want to ask yourself, what is my subconscious trying to help me with here? How is my subconscious looking at this behavior? What is it trying to keep me safe from? What is it trying to prevent for me? And when it comes to the subconscious trying to keep you safe, you can ask yourself, what does my subconscious think it's doing for me? How is my subconscious trying to help me with this behavior? What problem is this behavior trying to solve? What is my subconscious protecting me from? If this behavior disappeared tomorrow, what would my subconscious worry about? Now, I don't expect you to completely solve your own behavior today. What I hope is that the next time you catch yourself doing something that frustrates you, that irritates you, that you don't understand, instead of asking yourself, what's wrong with me? You'll ask a different question. What is my subconscious trying to accomplish? Because once you start asking better questions, you start finding better answers.